Please welcome three women who have most recently held the Parliament of the World's Religions Women's Leadership roles. Phyllis Curott, first chair of the Women's Task Force. Elizabeth Ursic, current chair of the Women's Task Force. And Audrey Kitagawa, incoming board chair.
What a joy to be here at the second Women's Assembly. You are my prayer, and you are the answer to prayer. In 2015, as vice chair, a prayer that I had had since attending the first modern parliament in 1993 was fulfilled. It was a dream shared by thousands to honor women's voices and to create the first Women's Assembly. As you've already heard from the remarkable women who've been up here, it is hard to be a pioneer. And when powerful religious institutions resisted the creation of Women's Assembly, women's spirit prevailed. When efforts were made to prevent certain troublesome women from speaking, women's spirit prevailed. When we had no money, we raised enough to bring leading women and women whose voices are rarely heard, Indigenous grandmothers and Dalit activists, green nuns and Mormon feminists and African environmentalists. And together, women's spirit prevailed. And when microphones were turned off, and lights and cameras, when they were all turned off, we gathered closer to share the holy things within our hearts, and inspired, we prevailed. From all over the world and all the world's faiths, almost 4,000 women and men filled the stages and the rooms and the sacred spaces and the hallways with our spirits, with our wisdom, and with our joy. We found our common and our sacred ground as women. And with that courage, 1 out of 3 women raised our hands to show that we prevailed despite sexual violence. And the Shiros inspired us to do more than prevail. We danced. For the first time, women had their own sacred space, a gorgeous red tent for women of all faiths, to pray and to meditate, to ritualize and to celebrate. And through the Parliament halls passed the divine feminine banners by the artist Lydia Rule. May her memory be a blessing to us all. Mothers from Israel and Palestine led the Women's Peace March. And from the great stage of the Parliament, the ancient 1,000 names of the great goddess, great mother, Mother Earth, were uttered by women of many faiths. And then we addressed the forbidden third rail of religion, the global human rights struggle of our time, the dignity and human rights of women. Together, we shifted the moral compass by collectively declaring that the justification of discrimination and violence against women and girls on the grounds of religion, as if it were prescribed by a higher authority, is unacceptable. To do so is to break faith. But we prevailed in faith when the Declaration for the Dignity and Human Rights of Women was adopted by the Parliament, leading the way forward to reconciliation and liberation for us all. And when the Parliament officially opened, and upon the stage there were only men, a great cry rose up from all around the hall. Where are the women? The women are here. And the women will always be here, because in 2015, we prevailed. And as long as there is a parliament of the world's religions, there will be a women's assembly. And now there will be the first woman chair of the parliament. Because within every woman is the wisdom and the power and the spirit to change the world into a just, sustainable, and peaceful world that honors the dignity and human rights of all. Together, we will prevail and we will dance.
So I've said so much already about the amazing experience of our 2018 Women's Task Force and the groundwork laid by Phyllis and all who came before us has really allowed a space to flourish. And throughout this parliament, and specifically this assembly, you're hearing how those voices are flourishing in many, many directions. And I would also like to say, having been at that open assembly, where there was only men on the stage, that we have made a great change, even on the board. With a group of 30 on the board, more or less, there was a time where there was only 4 women in recent history. And we are now moving much, much closer to parity than we have ever had. Thank you. I can also say that I've brought to the board and is going to be enacted before we leave that as a board we are going to consider all joining he for she in recognition of all the allies of men that are working with us. And finally, as Phyllis has mentioned, has already been said in the announcement, I want you to know how historic this is. Generally, after a parliament, it's at the very closing that the new incoming chair is announced. But for the first time in parliament history, we now have a female incoming chair of the parliament in this amazing woman, Audrey Kitagawa. I also want to say, if you can't see this on the screens remotely, that she received a standing ovation. First one during the assembly. And also, I want everyone to know that it was a unanimous vote, that only one name was put forward, and the entire board unanimously endorsed and voted on her acceptance. And in that, let the parliament be an example of how we as a community, men and women, humanity on the planet, can heal history. And with that, I will turn it over to our incoming chair that we have now announced earlier than has ever been said, because she is historic, Audrey Kitagawa.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, everyone. And it is my great privilege to be here with you today. And it is also my great privilege to be the first chair, woman chair, of the Parliament of the World's Religions. This year marks the 125th anniversary of the Parliament of the World's Religions. It only took 125 years, but we got there. And that demonstrates the Parliament's willingness to grow organically in recognition of the importance of the role of women in the world, historically, today, and into the future. For we cannot have progress in humanity through the oppression, suppression, depression, and ignoring the voices and participation of women across the board. And the Parliament demonstrates its willingness to understand that we cannot deal with global issues and challenges and expect progress to take place without having half the world's population participate, and that's the women. So we look forward to the Parliament leading the way. Yesterday, I was on a panel on the future of religion. Well, the future of religion now, as well as into the future of the Parliament now, as well as into the future of the Parliament. And this is true for all leading institutions and workplaces everywhere in the world. The future will be birthed from the womb of women that will speak to our well-being, our wholesomeness, and our wholeness as one world. Thank you.
And now to complete the history of women at the Parliament, I would like all the women and men who have spoken at any Parliament, taken any leadership role, to please stand and let us recognize your contribution. All the session leaders from this time and all the previous ones, please rise and be acknowledged. Thank you.